As sustainability continues to be an important talking point across society and politics, we're often looking for ways that we can reduce our environmental footprint, both people at a personal level and companies on an industrial scale. Many practices in our modern world, from business and agriculture to transport and everyday electricity usage, lead to the emission of carbon dioxide, CO2, an excess of which has a harmful warming effect on the planet. That's not to mention the pollutants that can find their way into the ecosystem as a byproduct of industrial processes. It's hard nowadays to find an organisation who aren't ecologically mindful, and many have publicly undergone changes or made mission statements about doing so in future. The gaming sector has been no stranger to this, with manufacturers and developers increasingly being spurred to take action. We've come a long way from dumping thousands of unsold copies of ET in a New Mexican desert. Of course, that's not to say that those in the gaming industry have been oblivious to the issues at hand. In fact, the medium has long since been a platform for environmentalist messaging. It was particularly evident in Sega's 90s catalogue. Sonic destroying machinery to free trapped animals was a statement about how industrialisation harms nature, something producer Yuji Naka felt that he couldn't talk openly about at the time. Dreadful Sonic rip-off Awesome Possum was much more on the nose, featuring enemies who are literally chopping down the rainforest and intermittently quizzing you on green matters before a jury of overbearing animals who look set to eat you if you get one wrong. Final Fantasy VII is another one that doesn't pull its punches. Its opening chapter sees Cloud's eco-terrorist group blow up one of Shinra Corporation's energy reactors at the cost of civilian lives. Antagonist Sephiroth tries to destroy the world after being experimented on by said organisation, which could be seen as a suggestion that the risks taken by fuel companies can have adverse effects on the globe, such as the controversial practice of fracking. In the 2020 remake, the script is even updated to suggest that there's still an over-reliance on fossil fuels despite society knowing about the impending danger. Even Mario has been involved in raising awareness. Eavesdropping on these crows in the Thousand-Year Door reveals that they're discussing their concern for the environment and what they think is the best source of renewable energy. It's a darkly amusing juxtaposition that even if the plumber saves the Mushroom Kingdom from being conquered by an evil demon, there's still a looming threat of ecological disaster to deal with on top of that. Endling Extinction is Forever, though, is perhaps the most blatant warning about our impact on nature, having you play as a fox trying to raise its cubs in a world ravaged by uncaring human activity. But in this video, we're going to look at that on a more real-world level. What effect does the production and playing of video games have on Mother Earth? How closely do game and console producers adhere to the green symbology that's so often present across their platforms? And what can creators and consumers do to reduce their ecological impact? One major aspect of this discussion is the method in which we purchase and play games, which aren't exempt from the problems faced by many manufacturers. There's the environmental toll of creating the discs, cartridges and plastic packaging, as well as shipping the items around the world. Compare this to the more straightforward electrical consumption of downloading data directly to a device or streaming a cloud-based version of a game, and it's unsurprising that digital is the greenest way to go. The carbon footprint of downloads can also be more easily regulated by the electrical grid, which many countries are working to decarbonise. My native Scotland, for example, has been involved in pioneering smart grid management to more efficiently distribute electricity depending on where and when it's needed. Fortuitously, this goes hand in hand with consumer trends. The UK's Digital Entertainment and Retail Association estimated that 89.5% of games sold in the UK in 2022 were digital downloads. There were similar findings in the American market, where the industry data tracker NPD GamePulse found that the availability of new physical games fell from 321 in 2018 to 226 in 2021, a decrease of almost 30% in the space of 2 years, with new releases in the latter year being 89.1% digitally exclusive. This isn't lost on console manufacturers. Sony and Microsoft both offer digital-only editions of their current platforms. That is, ones that don't have a disc drive and can only play games downloaded from online shops. With digital ownership of media outpacing physical, it makes sense that companies would capitalise on this. Sony described the PS5 Slim as addressing the evolving needs of players, and while that might ultimately come down to convergence, convenience and cost, it perfectly complements environmental policy. Microsoft's all-digital Xbox Series S, though, is perhaps the most eco-friendly console on the market, using less energy than its Series X counterpart. It's even partly manufactured from recycled materials, as are other new hardware designs such as the Electric Volt and Daystrike camo controllers, fashioned from things like headlight covers, water jugs and CDs. Leaked court documents actually showed that the Series S was outselling the Series X, and that a refreshed version of the X, codenamed Brooklyn and slated for 2024, will also lose the disk drive and come in 100% recyclable packaging. The other big gun, Nintendo, seemingly haven't pledged any carbon neutrality, but have taken steps in making their designs, packaging, offices and logistics more sustainable. Each iteration of the Switch has used less power consumption during gameplay than its predecessor, with the 2021 OLED model using half that of the 2017 original. There are rumours of a digital-only Switch 2, which wouldn't surprise me should the big N choose to match their competitors for the aforementioned economic and environmental reasons. Developers have followed suit in terms of how they release their games. Going software only is obviously a less risky option for indie devs who might not be able to fund physical production, but even some high profile titles like the recent Alan Wake 2 have been exclusively digital. Some also start life digitally before graduating to sit alongside the big names in real world shops, like acclaimed indie hits Hades and Shovel Knight. Aside from the competitive cost factor, for both creator and consumer, this is perhaps a more responsible way of releasing physical products, only doing so when demand merits it, instead of shipping something that will rot on shelves. Sports Interactive have continued to release hard copies of their Football Manager series due to demand in certain territories, but have begun to offset their emissions by making the packaging entirely recycled and recyclable, as well as using low density shrink wrap and vegetable based ink for printing. On an even wider scale than companies' own policies, the United Nations have backed the Playing for the Planet initiative, which seeks to assist developers in being more environmentally sound and promoting messages through their work in the Green Game Jam. This saw Sony plant a real tree for anyone who earned the Reach the Dawn achievement in Horizon Forbidden West in the weeks following its launch. Similarly, Niantic partnered with search engine Ecosia to plant a tree for every 5 kilometres that players walked during a community day in Pokemon Go, Pikmin Bloom and Ingress. Dubbed Green Activations, these unobtrusive challenges allow users to do some good in the real world while having fun in a virtual one. Certain titles, however, have really dropped the ball when it comes to mindful manufacturing. The retail copy of 2022's Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 contains a measly 72 megabytes of data on the disc, requiring a download of over 100 gigabytes to install the rest of the first-person shooter. This was met with some criticism. What was the point in creating and shipping a product if it required such an immense download anyway? Same goes for Hogwarts Legacy on Switch. The cartridge boasting around 7GB will necessitate an extra 8GB of downloaded patches. 2018's Fallout 76 was even more egregious. The boxed PC version didn't even contain a real disc, just a piece of cardboard with instructions on how to download the game. Is this just blind, costly adherence to tradition at the expense of the environment? Or is having a tactile item on a shelf a form of advertising or a symbol of status? It's not just this initial download that's the problem though. Limiting the amount of post-release updates a game needs could ease the environmental pressure too. A common problem is that AAAs too often require hefty patches to fix problems encountered by players upon launch. We still hear stories of games needing significantly patched up after being served in semi-playable states, riddled with performance issues and immersion breaking bugs. Keeping a project in the development oven a bit longer could address this need for additional data consumption, but this seemingly isn't possible with the more commercially urgent titles, for which there are higher stakes to meet release deadlines. Lining Santa Claus's sack, for instance. Shigeru Miyamoto once said, "A delayed game is eventually good, but a rushed game is bad forever." That doesn't quite hold up in the same way nowadays when they can be updated post-launch, save for long-lasting reputational damage, but maybe it can be reworded. A delayed game is eventually good, but a rushed game hurts the planet. It's worth considering too that as the medium becomes increasingly ubiquitous and permanently connected, there's the risk of cloud-based experiences drawing power to rival the CO2 of the physical production process. These work via transmissions between the end user and remote data centres, the latter of which use vast amounts of electrical energy and water to keep them running. A console on average uses 156% more energy during cloud gaming compared to local. A 2020 study by the University of Lancaster found that gaming accounted for 7% of global network demand, with 95% of that comprising downloaded content, but if cloud gaming grew to be used by just 30% of gamers by 2030, it'll result in almost the same percentage increase in carbon emissions, and that's envisioning them doing so at 1080p resolution max, never mind if the more resource intensive 4K becomes more widespread. Microsoft have committed to shifting their Azure data centres to using 100% renewable energy by 2025, among other targets, tackling this potential problem of more pervasive cloud gaming. There might be some defences that can be made of physical media though. These can be bought and sold second hand as well as swapped. Anyone who was gaming before the internet will no doubt have fond memories of trading games with friends, the original demo versions. There's also a nostalgic tactile satisfaction to owning a title that you love, and boxed copies could also be a more convenient option for an uninitiated person who wants to gift a game to a loved one but might not be aware of digital formats. Physical copies might prove important for preserving games for posterity, especially when console companies have a tendency to put profit before preservation. Nintendo, for example, mainly offer their retro library in streamed form via Switch Online, having closed their previous consoles' eShops. Physical options allow players to collect and catalogue titles that might one day become unavailable if companies get complacent when it comes to protecting their legacy. The problem with that, however, is that this would only really count as preservation for one person. Making a game widely available would require copying and distributing its content online to be used in emulation. That's an interesting but separate discussion though. Discs and cartridges are also subject to wear and tear in the ravages of time, with dead internal batteries, scratches, misplacement and general atrophy making them unplayable. Overall, when it comes to owning a material product, the environmentalist argument only goes so far. There is one elephant in the room though. NFTs. These non-fungible tokens, purchased via cryptocurrency, are used as a method of showing exclusive ownership of a digital asset. These can be used in games and other online spaces for purposes such as the ever-alluring aspect of customising your avatar. However, NFTs have proven divisive among gamers, not least because the blockchain platforms in which they exist use perpetual electrical consumption, albeit to varying degrees. Despite their green credentials, a patent filed last year showed that Sony have been working on them. Sega have also registered NFT-based trademarks and funded third-party usage of them, but have rowed back on fully committing to the technology themselves, with co-chief operating officer Shuji Utsume even calling such games boring. It wouldn't be very in keeping with their mascot's green roots either. Konami, on the other hand, made the equivalent of £119,000 at the start of 2022 by auctioning off 14 pieces of digital Castlevania artwork, while Peter Molyneux's blockchain business simulator Legacy sold millions in virtual land prior to its release. Companies might face the challenge of responding to potential demand for these evolving technologies while staying on course to meet their environmental targets, although reports that 95% of NFTs are now worthless and that 30% of crypto games have been discontinued might be an indicator that blockchain gaming won't be a long-term trend. So where do we go from here? For gamers, digital is probably the way to go where possible. Don't get me wrong, I like having the boxes, but it's also very satisfying to have a nice bulky Steam catalogue to browse and never get through. You can also turn off devices when not in use, and that goes for all electronics, and properly recycle or resell any unwanted tech. Of course, I'm not here to lecture, and the onus isn't really on you. Real change will have to come from scientific advancement and action at industrial and governmental levels, where it often becomes a much more complex issue, but it doesn't hurt to be mindful of your own earthly impact. Whichever way you choose, hopefully continued improvements will allow us to enjoy gaming well into the future and in the most sustainable way.